The town of Willow Bend shimmered in the noonday sun, its single dirt road lined with creaky porches, hitching posts, and a windmill that sang with every passing gust. The air smelled of dust, horses, and the faint sweetness of baking bread from Mrs. Dobbin's bakery. People moved slow that day, too hot to hurry, but one small figure darted through the crowd with purpose. Little Ellie Mae Dawson, 6 years old, barefoot and freckle-faced, carried a paper bag of apples almost too big for her arms. Her mother had sent her to fetch them from the store, but Ellie had a habit of wandering when something or someone caught her eye. That someone appeared the moment Jack Colton, a towering cowboy with a weathered hat and sun-darkened skin, dismounted his horse outside the general store. He was hard to miss. Broad shoulders, quiet eyes, and the kind of presence that made people step aside without quite knowing why. Jack tipped his hat to the store clerk, but before he could take a step inside, a tiny voice stopped him. "You'll do," Ellie announced. Jack turned slowly. The little girl stood with her chin lifted, her braid half undone, one apple rolling out of the bag and thudding against his boot. "Beg pardon?" he asked, a hint of amusement softening his deep voice. Ellie pointed straight at him, her serious blue eyes squinting up. "You'll do. Mama needs you too." The few townsfolk nearby froze, then burst into laughter. Jack blinked, glancing around as if someone might explain what was happening. The child, however, looked dead serious, as if she'd just delivered the verdict of a lifetime. Before Jack could respond, a woman came hurrying down the boardwalk, skirts flying and worry etched across her tired but beautiful face. "Ellie Mae Dawson," she gasped. "What on earth?" The girl dropped her gaze for a heartbeat, but only a heartbeat. "Mama," she said softly, tugging at Clara's hand. "He's big and strong. He could help us." "You said we need help." Clara's cheeks flushed crimson. "I meant with the roof, not—" She stopped herself, flustered. "Sir, I am so sorry." Jack tilted his hat politely, the corner of his mouth twitching. "No harm done, ma'am. Just caught me by surprise." Clara gathered her daughter and the spilled apples, muttering something about manners and imaginations too wild. Jack might have walked away right then, but something about the exchange tugged at him. Maybe it was the way Clara's shoulders sagged when she thought no one was watching, or how the girl clung to her with fierce loyalty. He'd seen hardship before, he knew it when he saw it. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "your little one's got a brave heart. Ain't something to apologize for." Clara met his eyes then, really met them. For a brief second, the noise of town faded and Jack saw the depth of her exhaustion, but also her pride. She nodded, managed a small smile, and led Ellie away toward the wagon. Jack watched them go, feeling something stir beneath the dust and solitude of his life. He wasn't sure what to call it, curiosity maybe, or a memory of the man he used to be before life hardened his edges. As he mounted his horse, the little girl turned back from the wagon seat and waved. "Don't go too far, mister. Mama still needs you." This time Jack laughed, a sound he hadn't made in years. He touched his hat in farewell and rode off toward the horizon, not knowing that the road would soon lead him right back to the Dawson women, and into the start of something he'd stopped believing in. A reason to stay. The sun had barely risen over the dusty hills when Clara Dawson stepped out onto the porch of her small boarding house. The building leaned a little, its white paint peeling, but it stood firm, like her. The air was still cool, and the faint smell of rain lingered from the night before. Clara took a deep breath and looked over her yard, where her daughter, Ellie Mae, was trying to coax a stray chicken back into the coop with a handful of corn. "Leave that poor bird alone." "Sweetheart," Clara called, her voice carrying a tired kind of warmth. "We've got guests to feed." "Yes, Mama," Ellie chirped, though she gave chase for another minute before finally letting the chicken go free. Clara smiled faintly despite herself. It was moments like that, small, ordinary, filled with her daughter's laughter, that made the weight of survival just a little easier to bear. After her husband, Tom Dawson, died in a wagon accident 3 years ago, Clara had been left with nothing but debt, a little girl and the stubborn will to keep their home. Tom's passing had left her not only widowed but hunted by collectors and men who saw a struggling woman as an easy target. She took to running a boarding house, renting out 3 small rooms to travelers and ranch hands, cooking from dawn till dusk, just to break even. Some nights the profits barely covered flour and coffee, the neighbors whispered. Poor Clara still trying to run that place alone. Others offered pity that sounded too much like judgment. But Clara had long ago decided she'd rather struggle with pride than accept charity wrapped in gossip. She moved inside to stir the morning coffee, listening to the creak of floorboards and the hum of her daughter's off-key singing. The little house was quiet, too quiet sometimes, and Clara found herself talking to Tom's old photograph just to fill the silence. "You'd laugh at me if you saw me now," she whispered. "Still patching roofs and scaring off vultures in boots too worn to shine." The knock on the door startled her. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened it to find Mr. Harlan Tate, a well-dressed landowner with a slick smile and eyes too sharp to trust. He tipped his hat but didn't wait for an invitation before stepping inside. "Mornin', Mrs. Dawson," he said. "I just came to remind you your property taxes are overdue again." Clara stiffened. "I'm aware, Mr. Tate. You'll have your payment by the end of the month." Tate leaned on the doorframe, studying her like a hawk. "You work too hard for too little. Why not sell the place? I'll offer you more than it's worth. You and your girl could move to town, start fresh." Clara folded her arms. "This is our home." "I'm not selling." Tate's smile turned thin. "Suit yourself. But the world's not kind to widows who play stubborn." He tipped his hat again and walked out, leaving the faint scent of tobacco and threat in his wake. Clara closed the door, her hands trembling slightly. She sat at the table staring at the bills stacked like weights on her soul. For a moment despair flickered, but she caught it before it grew. Ellie came skipping in, holding a dandelion she'd plucked from the yard. "Mama, look. It's for your wishes." Clara took the flower and smiled through the ache. "Then I'll wish for better days, baby." As Ellie ran off again, Clara's gaze drifted to the road leading out of town. Somewhere out there rode the tall cowboy her daughter had so boldly chosen for them. She shook her head, half smiling, half wistful. "Lord," she murmured softly, "she sure does dream big." And though she didn't know it yet, Ellie's innocent words had already set fate in motion. The kind that didn't just fix roofs or debts, but hearts long left untended. The morning sun crept over the ridge of Colton Ranch, painting the open plains gold. Jack Colton sat on the fence rail, sipping black coffee and watching the horses graze. The ranch stretched wide and silent, miles of land he'd built with his own hands in years of solitude. It should have felt like freedom, but lately it felt like nothing at all. 3 years ago, he'd buried his brother Elias after a fall from a wild bronco. A week later, the woman Jack was supposed to marry left him for a banker in Abilene. Since then, he'd worked like a man chasing away ghosts, riding fence lines, mending barns, and talking only to his horse, Duke. He didn't go to town unless necessary. People meant trouble, and hearts, he'd decided, were best left closed. But ever since that strange little girl in town had pointed at him and said, "You'll do, Mama needs you too," he hadn't been able to shake the memory. Her confidence, her mother's quiet strength, the way something in Clara Dawson's eyes reminded him of sunlight trying to break through storm clouds. He tried to forget. He told himself it was just a funny encounter, a child's imagination. But when he rode into town a week later for supplies, he found himself glancing toward the general store, half hoping to see them again, as luck or fate would have it. He did. Ellie Mae Dawson was outside the feed store, crouched by a crate of kittens, her face full of wonder. When she saw Jack, her grin spread wide. "It's you," she cried, rushing toward him. "Mama said you're just a neighbor, but I told her neighbors can still be family if they try." Jack blinked, half amused, half embarrassed. "That right?" he said, hitching his reins. "You sure talk big for such a little thing." "I'm not little," she said, with the fierce pride only children carry. "I help Mama with guests and dishes and everything. You could help too if you wanted." Before Jack could respond, Clara appeared, holding a sack of flour. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him. "Mr. Colton?" she said politely, though her voice carried a tremor of surprise. "Didn't expect to see you again." Jack tipped his hat. "Just needed feed. Thought I'd say howdy." Ellie beamed, swinging her small hand into her mother's. "See, Mama? I told you he's nice." Clara sighed softly, but there was a hint of a smile there, too. "You'll have to forgive her. She's outspoken. Reminds me of my brother's girl," Jack said gently. "Never met a shy one yet who made a difference." Something softened in Clara's face, an understanding maybe, or gratitude. "Well," she said after a pause, "the fence out back keeps leaning. If you know anyone good with repairs, I'll come by tomorrow," Jack said before she could finish. Clara blinked. "I didn't mean," he shrugged. "Can't have your chickens running wild." Besides, your little one already volunteered me. Ellie giggled. Told you, Mama. The next day, Jack rode to the Dawson place. The land was small but tidy, the porch flowers freshly watered, the paint worn by weather and time. He set to work fixing the fence while Clara baked biscuits for her boarders. Every so often, Ellie appeared with a cup of lemonade or a dozen questions about horses. By sunset, the fence stood straight again, and for the first time in years, Jack felt needed. It startled him, how natural it felt to stay for supper, how easily Ellie's laughter filled the quiet corners of his heart. When he finally rode home under the rising moon, the ache of loneliness he'd long accepted as normal felt sharper, because now he remembered what warmth felt like. And though he told himself it was just a neighborly favor, Jack Colton knew better. Something had begun to change in him, slowly, quietly, like the first green shoot after a long, hard winter. The Willow Bend Harvest Fair arrived with the smell of cinnamon, dust, and laughter. The streets that usually sat quiet and sunbaked now thrummed with life. Stalls lined both sides of the main road, bright quilts hung from porches, and children ran with ribbons in their hair. Fiddles played somewhere near the livery stable, and the scent of roasted corn and fresh pies filled the air. Clara Dawson hadn't planned to go. Her money was tight and her chores endless, but Ellie Mae had begged for a whole week, so full of excitement that Clara finally gave in. She braided Ellie's hair with little wildflowers and wore her one good blue dress, faded at the seams but still flattering. When they arrived in town, Ellie's eyes lit up like the lanterns that would later glow over the dance square. "Mama, look! There's the taffy stand! And, oh!" She froze, grinning, and pointed. "There's him!" Clara followed her daughter's gaze and saw Jack Colton, tall and calm in the crowd, his hat tipped low against the sun. He was helping an old woman carry a crate of pumpkins, sleeves rolled up, forearms dusted with earth. The sight made something flutter unexpectedly in Clara's chest. "Mama, can we go say hi?" Ellie asked, already tugging on her hand. Before Clara could protest, Ellie darted forward. "Mr. Cowboy," she called. Jack turned, smiled faintly, and knelt to her level. "Well, if it isn't Miss Ellie Mae," he said. "You here to win all the games?" She grinned. "Only if you help me. Mama says you're good with your hands," Jack chuckled. "Does she now?" His eyes found Clara's as she approached, and though she tried to act composed, she felt the heat rise in her cheeks. "Good afternoon, Mr. Colton," she said. "I hope Ellie hasn't been pestering you." "Not at all," Jack said, standing. "Reckon I've missed worse company." His tone was easy, kind, but his gaze lingered a little longer than it should have. They spent the next hour wandering through the fair together. Jack helped Ellie toss horseshoes and win a jar of marmalade. When Clara protested he was spoiling her, Jack simply said, "Can't let a lady walk away empty-handed." Later, as the sun dipped low and lanterns began to glow, the fiddlers struck up a lively tune. Couples gathered near the town square, boots thudding on the worn boards as laughter and music tangled in the air. Ellie tugged on her mother's skirt. "Dance, Mama, please." "Oh, I don't—" Clara began, but Jack offered his hand. "Ma'am," he said softly, "it'd be a shame to let a fine song go to waste." She hesitated. Every part of her wanted to say no. She wasn't young, carefree, or ready for the kind of hope that a dance might awaken. But Ellie's wide eyes and Jack's quiet patience made her hand lift almost on its own. The music slowed as they stepped onto the square. Jack's palm was warm against hers, his other hand resting lightly at her waist. For a moment, Clara forgot the weight of her worries. The lanterns shimmered above them like stars, and she could almost believe the world was kind again. "You move easy," Jack murmured. Clara laughed softly. "That's because you're leading." They turned, swaying gently as the crowd clapped in rhythm. For a heartbeat, they weren't widow and rancher. They were just two souls who'd been lonely too long, finding peace in a shared song. But then Clara caught the tail end of whispered gossip from a nearby woman. "That's Jack Colton. Heard he's courting the widow Nash out by Sweetwater Creek." The words struck like a nail through her heart. Her smile faltered. When the song ended, she pulled back, murmuring, "Thank you for the dance, Mr. Colton," and stepped away before he could explain. Jack stood there, confused and silent as she walked off into the lantern-lit crowd, Ellie skipping beside her. He'd meant only kindness, but something in her eyes told him he'd just lost the fragile trust they'd begun to build. and as the laughter and music faded into the night, both of them wondered, had they just let something beautiful slip through their fingers? The next morning, Clara Dawson moved through her kitchen with a stiffness she couldn't quite explain. The rhythm of her day, coffee, laundry, sweeping, bread rising, should have steadied her. But instead, each simple task echoed with thoughts she didn't want to think. Jack Colton, his hand steady on her waist. The easy laughter she hadn't heard in years. And that whispered gossip, he's courting the widow Nash. Clara told herself it didn't matter. Jack was a kind man, nothing more. She'd been foolish to let a dance or a look mean anything. Still, when Ellie came skipping into the kitchen humming the tune from last night, Clara's heart clenched. "Mama," Ellie said, swinging her braid. "Mr. Jack said he'd teach me to ride one day. Can I go to his ranch?" Clara froze. "No, sweetheart, Mr. Colton's got work to do. We don't want to bother him." Ellie frowned. "But he said—" "I said no, Ellie Mae." Clara's tone came sharper than intended. The girl's lip trembled and Clara immediately softened. "I'm sorry, honey, I just think we've leaned on his kindness enough." Ellie looked down, quiet now, and Clara's heart cracked in the silence that followed. Out on Colton Ranch, Jack was feeling the weight of that same silence. He'd ridden into town the morning after the fair, hoping to see Clara or Ellie, maybe share breakfast or help with the chicken coop again. But when he arrived, the Dawson house looked shuttered and distant. The gate he'd fixed last week was closed tight. He knocked once. No answer, he called out, "Mrs. Dawson?" and got only the rustle of the wind. Jack stepped back, confused. Maybe she was busy. Maybe he'd said something wrong. Or maybe that smile at the dance, her eyes so bright under the lanterns, had been wishful thinking. He rode home with questions that wouldn't stop circling. For the first time in years, he'd wanted something beyond ranch work and quiet nights. And for the first time, he felt like he wasn't enough to have it. Days turned into a week. Then another. Clara busied herself with borders, determined to bury any longing beneath work. She told herself Jack's silence meant nothing. He was a cowboy, after all. Men like him didn't linger long near widows with too many burdens. But sometimes, late at night, she'd glance out her window and imagine the sound of hooves coming down the road. Her chest would lift just for a moment, then fall when all she heard was the wind. Ellie, however, refused to let go so easily. One afternoon, she waited until her mother was hanging laundry, then slipped out the gate barefoot and determined. She followed the trail she'd seen Jack ride once before, through the meadow, across the little creek that marked the edge of his land. When Jack saw her trudging up the dirt path, dusty and red-cheeked, he nearly dropped his saddle-brush. "Ellie Mae Dawson," he said in disbelief. "What in the world are you doing way out here?" She folded her arms. "Mama won't talk about you." She sat again. "You have to come fix it," Jack blinked. "Fix it? I didn't even know it was broke." Ellie's voice wobbled. "She thinks you like another lady, but I told her you like us." For a long moment, Jack said nothing. He crouched to her level, looking into those fearless blue eyes that reminded him so much of her mother's. "You're a brave one," he said softly. "But some things take time to fix." He saddled his horse and rode her home himself, the child talking the whole way. When they reached Clara's gate, she burst out the door, panic written across her face. "Ellie Mae, where have you—" She froze when she saw Jack. He dismounted slowly, tipping his hat. "Found her walking the trail," he said quietly. "Didn't mean to overstep?" Clara's hands trembled as she pulled Ellie close. "Thank you," she managed. "But please, don't come again." Jack hesitated, jaw tightening, but nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." He turned and rode away, the sound of hooves fading like a heartbeat slowing to silence. And as the dust settled, Clara leaned against the gate, tears she didn't understand stinging her eyes. She'd wanted to keep him out, yet every step he took away felt like something precious slipping from her grasp. The wind carried a strange stillness that evening, one that made even the chickens uneasy. Clara Dawson stood at the window, the fading light painting her small house in shades of gold and worry. Ellie Mae was asleep on the settee, her hair spilling across the pillow, her little chest rising and falling in peace Clara could no longer feel. It had been weeks since she'd seen Jack Colton. Since that day he'd brought Ellie home, he'd kept his word. He hadn't come near the Dawson place again. She told herself it was for the best. But when she looked at the half-fixed porch rail or the quiet road beyond the fence, A hollow ache filled her. She didn't know that trouble was already on its way. As the last light of day slipped behind the ridge, a knock came at the door. Not a polite one, heavy, sharp, impatient. Clara's stomach tightened. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and opened the door just a crack. On her porch stood Harlan Tate, hat low, his coat collar turned up against the wind. Behind him, two rough-looking men loomed, shadows stretching across her porch steps. "Evenin', Mrs. Dawson," Tate drawled, the smile never reaching his eyes. "Hate to drop by uninvited, but I reckon it's time we settle that debt." Clara's fingers tightened on the door. "I told you I'd have payment by the end of the month." "It's not even due yet." "Plans change," Tate said smoothly, handing her a folded paper. "Seems I bought out the loan from the bank this morning. Makes me your new creditor." Clara unfolded the paper with trembling hands. The words blurred, but she saw enough to understand he wasn't bluffing. The debt had been transferred. And he could take her home. Her voice came out steady despite the fear knotting her chest. "You won't scare me, Mr. Tate. This is my house." Tate stepped forward, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Then maybe we come to an arrangement," he murmured. "A woman alone can't keep up with all this. Maybe you let me take care of you." "You, your little girl." His eyes lingered in a way that made Clara's skin crawl. "Could have a good life if you'd stop fighting me." Clara's heart pounded. "Get off my property," she hissed. Tate's smirk hardened. "I'll give you till tomorrow night to think about it. After that, this place is mine." He turned, signaling his men. They laughed as they climbed into their wagon and disappeared down the dark road. Clara locked the door and sagged against it, shaking. She looked at Ellie, still asleep, blissfully unaware, and whispered a prayer she wasn't sure would be heard. Out on the plains, the wind was rising. Jack Colton rode home from town, uneasy without knowing why. Something in his gut told him to turn toward the Dawson place. He tried to ignore it. Clara had made her feelings clear. But when lightning split the sky over Willow Bend, he cursed under his breath and tugged the reins. He arrived just as the storm broke, rain slashing sideways, thunder cracking like gunfire. He saw the wagon tracks near Clara's gate, too deep for ordinary visitors. His instincts sharpened. Inside, Clara was trying to nail the shutters closed when another knock thundered, louder this time, angry. Her blood ran cold, but when she opened the door, it wasn't Harlan Tate, it was Jack. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, soaked through, his eyes scanning her face. "You all right?" Clara's voice shook. "He was here, Jack. Tate, he says he owns the house now." Jack's expression darkened, jaw tight. "He don't own a damn thing." Before she could stop him, Jack stepped onto the porch, lightning flashing behind him. "I'll take care of it," he said simply, and there was something in his voice, a promise carved from steel. Moments later, Tate's wagon returned, his men ready to scare her again. But they hadn't counted on Jack Colton. What happened next was fast, rough, and fierce. Words turned to shoves, shoves to fists, and the storm howled around them as if the heavens themselves were bearing witness. One of Tate's men drew a pistol. Clara screamed. Jack lunged, taking the bullet meant for her shoulder square in his side. The gun clattered to the ground. Tate's men fled into the rain, dragging their furious boss with them. Clara dropped to her knees beside Jack, her hands trembling as she pressed against the wound. "Stay with me," pleased Jack. Through gritted teeth, he managed a faint, pained smile. "Told you. I'd take care of it." Lightning flashed again, and the sound of Ellie's frightened cry filled the house as the storm raged on, outside and within. For 2 days and nights, Jack Colton hovered between life and death. The storm had passed, but inside the small Dawson house, the air was thick with fear and prayer. Clara hadn't slept since the night he fell. She'd dragged him in from the porch with strength she didn't know she possessed, stripped away his soaked shirt, and bound the wound as best she could. The bullet had grazed his ribs, painful but not fatal. Still, fever had followed, and Clara stayed at his side, wiping his brow, whispering his name, begging him to fight. Now, in the pale light of morning, she sat in a chair beside his bed, her hand resting lightly over his. The rough calluses of his palm felt strange beneath her fingers, foreign yet comforting. Ellie slept curled up at the foot of the bed, clutching her rag doll, refusing to leave the man who had saved them. Clara spoke softly, half to herself. "You didn't have to do it, Jack. You could have ridden on. But you didn't." Her eyes glistened. "You nearly died protecting me, And I never even thanked you for fixing that fence or for teaching my girl to laugh again." Jack stirred, his brow furrowing, a low sound escaping his throat. Clara leaned forward quickly, her heart leaping. "Jack, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered open. For a long moment he just looked at her, disoriented. Then his voice rasped low and dry. "Reckon I've had better mornings." A laugh broke out of Clara, shaky but real. "You fool," she whispered, tears spilling over. "You scared me half to death." Jack's gaze drifted to Ellie, still sleeping soundly, and then back to Clara. "Is she all right?" "She's fine," Clara said. "Thanks to you." Jack exhaled slowly, pain flickering across his face. "Didn't figure I'd get shot fixing fences." "You weren't fixing fences," Clara said softly. "You were saving our lives." Their eyes met, and for a moment the silence said everything. The fear, the gratitude, the unspoken truth that had been growing between them since that first meeting in town. By evening, Jack could sit up, weak but alive. Clara brought him broth, though her hands trembled slightly as she set it down. "You should rest," she said. He gave her a faint grin. "You've said that every hour on the hour." She rolled her eyes, but her smile was tender. "Then maybe you should start listening." Jack studied her for a long moment. "You're not afraid of much, are you?" Clara's gaze dropped. "You'd be surprised," he frowned. "Tate won't bother you again." "I'll see to that." "That's not what I meant." Her voice softened. "I'm afraid of wanting too much. Of losing someone again." Jack's expression gentled. "You won't lose me." The words hung between them, quiet but steady like a vow. Clara felt her throat tighten. "Don't make promises you can't keep, Jack Colton." He reached out, his fingers brushing hers. "Ma'am, I don't make promises I don't mean." She looked at him then, really looked. The rugged cowboy who'd spent years hiding from the world had risked his life for her and her daughter without hesitation. And for the first time since Tom's death, Clara felt her heart open, not out of desperation but trust. That night, when Ellie woke and saw Jack awake, she scrambled onto the bed and hugged him tight. "I told you not to leave," she whispered fiercely. Jack smiled, wincing a little at the pain. "Guess I'm not much good at saying no to you, Miss Ellie." Clara laughed softly through her tears. "That makes two of us." As the fire crackled in the hearth, warmth spread through the little house again, gentle, real. The kind that only comes when hearts begin to heal together. Outside, the stars shone bright over Willow Bend, and for the first time in a long time, Clara Dawson felt that maybe, just maybe, the Lord hadn't forgotten her after all. And as she watched Jack drift back into peaceful sleep, she whispered the truth she could finally admit, if only to herself. "You're home, cowboy. You just don't know it yet." Spring came soft to Willow Bend. The snow melted from the ridge, the creek ran full again, and wildflowers began to scatter across the prairie like spilled paint. Life returned to the land and to the little Dawson homestead. Jack Colton stayed through the thaw. At first it was only to make sure the ranch fence held, as he said, though everyone in town knew better. Soon he was there each morning, mending the porch rail, chopping wood, or taking Ellie on slow rides along the creek. Her laughter ringing like music across the fields. Clara told herself she didn't need his help. But every time she saw him in the yard, sleeves rolled, sunlight on his face, her heart tugged in a way that no longer scared her. One afternoon she found him in the barn fixing the wagon wheel. Ellie sat nearby, braiding wildflowers into the old horse's mane. "You've done more than enough, Jack," Clara said softly. "You should go back to your own place." Jack glanced up, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe I like this place better." Clara folded her arms, pretending not to smile. "You've got a whole ranch waiting for you." He met her eyes steadily. "Doesn't feel like home without you two in it." Her breath caught. She'd heard plenty of kind words before, but none had ever felt like this. Steady, honest, real. A few days later, the town gathered for the spring festival. Music, laughter, and the smell of roasting corn filled the air. Clara and Ellie arrived hand in hand, dressed in simple cotton dresses, sunlight in their hair. Jack was already there, talking with the blacksmith, but when he saw them, he stopped mid-sentence. "Afternoon, Miss Dawson." "Miss Ellie," he said with a tip of his hat. Ellie grinned. "Are you going to dance with Mama again?" Clara flushed.
"Ellie!"
But Jack chuckled, stepping closer. "Only if your mama says yes." Clara hesitated, but Ellie nudged her gently. Go on, Mama. You smiled last time. And so she did. Under the lanterns they danced, slower this time, the world fading away around them. Clara felt the rough warmth of Jack's hand on hers, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her fingers. For once she didn't think about what she'd lost or what could go wrong. She just let herself be. Alive, seen, held. When the song ended, Jack didn't let go right away. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, his voice low. Clara, I ain't good at fancy words. But I know I can't walk away from you or that little girl. Her eyes glistened. Jack. He went down on one knee, right there in the dust between the fiddlers and the bonfire. I ain't rich and I've made my share of mistakes. But if you'll have me, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to stand alone again. For a heartbeat, the world went still. Then Ellie squealed, throwing her arms around both of them. I told you, Mama. He's the one! Laughter rippled through the crowd, but Clara barely heard it. She looked down at the man who had risked his life for her, taught her to laugh again, and loved her not despite her scars, but because of them. She cupped his face gently. You already did that, Jack. You gave us a home before you even asked. And with tears shining in her eyes, she whispered, yes. That night, as the stars shimmered over Willow Bend, Jack lifted Ellie onto his shoulders while Clara walked beside him, her hand resting in his. The old fears had faded, replaced by something truer, belonging. No longer the giant cowboy wandering alone. No longer the widow holding back her heart. No longer the little girl wishing for a father. They had found what they didn't even know they were missing. A family made, not found.